Welcome to this talk about our new book, Advising Philanthropists, Principles and Practice. In this talk, we're going to take you through all the different chapters of the book, and we're going to highlight some of the key points along the way. So I'm going to hand over to Beth to get us started.
Thanks, Emma. Well, let me start with a basic question. Does philanthropy advice matter? We've just written a whole book about that topic, so of course we believe it's an interesting and important part of the philanthropy ecosystem. But you don't need to just take our word for it. There are plenty of historic and contemporary voices making the same point. Perhaps the most well-known quote on this topic is attributed to the Scottish-American tycoon and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie. Despite his journey from dire poverty to one of the world's first multimillionaires, he claims that it's more difficult to give money away intelligently than to earn it in the first place. But that thought didn't begin with Carnegie. Well over 2,000 years before he was shaking up both the American steel industry and global philanthropy, the Greek philosopher Aristotle noted that to give away money is an easy matter in any man's power, but to decide to whom to give it and how much and when and for what purpose and how is neither in every man's power nor an easy matter. If we fast forward to the 19th century, still many decades before Carnegie and fellow titan John D. Rockefeller, in 1837, Angela Burdett Coutts inherited the banking fortune from her grandfather, Thomas Coutts. But as a woman of that time, she could neither run the business nor get directly involved with the many charitable causes that she wished to use her great fortune to help, primarily the London poor, including the most marginalised, such as prostitutes and unmarried mothers. So she turned to her friend, Charles Dickens, the by then celebrated novelist and a client of Coutts Bank, who used the knowledge that he'd gained from growing up poor and from doing the research for his novels to advise her on how best to disperse her fortune. He helped her become not just prolific and generous, but also innovative. For example, in 1850, she made an interest-free loan so that the Royal Marsden Hospital could be built. And she also helped those in Ireland affected by the Great Famine with both direct relief and also paid for boats and fishing equipment to stimulate the fishing industry. These are the kind of things we imagine only 21st century new philanthropists do. This is why our contemporary colleague and fellow author Shana Goldstecker, who has focused on understanding how millennials give, describes advisors as the silent chorus that can help donors to thrive. To give a notable current example, most people have heard of Mackenzie Scott, the former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, who's given away around $14 billion so far over the past 3 years. But far fewer people will be aware that she hired the Bridgespan Group, a philanthropy consultancy, to advise and support her giving. But what do we know about whether and which donors want this kind of help? I've been involved in many UK studies of major donors, and now we have a fairly clear idea about why rich people give. This wheel diagram highlights the 5 main factors that influence giving decisions by the wealthy. Firstly, their belief in the cause, which often develops as a result of personal experiences and personal connections, such as themselves or a loved one gaining a health condition, or gratitude to the university where they studied, or to an arts organisations that they enjoy attending. The second strongest driver is a desire to be a catalyst for change, to make something happen that would otherwise not have happened, responding to new needs or those left unmet by government and business. Thirdly, big donors seek self-actualization, by which we mean the satisfaction of personal development, of learning and having new experiences. Fourthly, there's a moral dimension because philanthropy enables donors to put their values into action. And the fifth and final motivation is the enjoyment that comes from building new and interesting relationships with people encountered through being a donor, such as charity staff, trustees, fellow donors, and, when appropriate, sometimes beneficiaries. So we know that philanthropy is deeply personal and that donors are pursuing multiple personal and public benefits at the same time through their giving. We also know that the amount of choice facing donors, over 100,000 fundraising charities in England and Wales alone, means they have to make hard choices between equally good options, which can lead to analysis paralysis, which is not a good outcome for either donors or those seeking their support. A further relevant finding is that donors rarely act in isolation. They typically discuss their ideas and their plans with their spouse, their children, their friends, and they say in research that they would welcome the subject being raised by their professional advisors, such as lawyers and financial advisors. Indeed, younger donors are especially open to seeking and taking philanthropy advice. So in sum, what donors want and need is personalised attention to guide them on their particular philanthropic journey to achieve outcomes that makes giving as personally satisfying and as publicly beneficial as possible.
So we wrote this book because the advisor's role is not well understood. We wanted to raise the profile of this emerging profession and show it's not just a la job, as described by an interviewee here, but a valuable, interesting, and tricky role. So how to describe philanthropy advisors? Philanthropy advisors combine knowledge of philanthropy, of different approaches and nonprofits, with facilitation as they take donors along a journey. To do this work, they need cognitive skills such as research and analysis, and people skills, so listening, building rapport, and building trust. A key lesson from the interviews we carried out was the variety amongst philanthropy advisors. They work in different settings, so in banks or large advisory firms, as independent practitioners, or in community foundations. They work with different donors, so you may have someone working with one family foundation, whilst another advisor will work with hundreds of different donors as part of a donor advised fund. They also have different approaches and different styles. There are no barriers to entry, so anyone can call themselves a philanthropy advisor. And we found a range of different routes into the profession. Some moved into philanthropy advice from working in financial services, whilst others came to it from charities, from international development and fundraising. There are some networks, there's some training. The training that does exist often focuses on the structures, so tax and giving vehicles, rather than the content and the ethics. And we want to see some increased recognition that philanthropy advising is a profession, and to see the adoption of shared standards and more training on offer, but in ways that keep this diversity of different people coming into the profession. Given the variety, what an advisor does on a day-to-day basis just depends. However, we break it down to 4 common steps. Firstly, clarifying the donor's values, their motivations and aspirations. These will underpin their philanthropy, and getting to the heart of what matters to them will help sustain their giving. Then helping the donor to choose a focus, designing a strategy or a roadmap or a plan for their giving, and finally supporting its implementation. And alongside this is donor education, where the advisor introduces the donor to philanthropy, to different philanthropic approaches, to the world of nonprofits, as well as knowledge of their area of interest through scoping studies or convening conversations with experts through visits and out in the field speaking with the communities that they seek to support, as well as then also connecting them with peers and in some cases learning about themselves. For example, exploring a family's attitude to wealth and wealth inequality, and so exploring who they want to be and how they want to contribute. In the book, we share a range of different frameworks and tools that advisors use. This image is just one example, and it reflects the reality that this is an iterative process where lots of different aspects are being juggled and balanced. The key point is that every step has many choices. So, for example, who in the family to involve and how, which structure to use for your giving, a donor advised fund or a foundation, how much to give, over what time horizon, how narrowly to focus your efforts, and on what. The advisor's role is to help the philanthropist navigate these choices and end up with something coherent that matches their aspirations. They also add value by providing challenge and a reality check that extends this thinking beyond the donor's wishes to encompass what the world needs. For example, to encourage collaboration with existing efforts, or to promote good practice in grant making that respects those delivering the work. They also open up to new concepts and ideas, such as reparative giving or prize philanthropy. Advising is not just about taking a client through the pros and cons of a set of logical choices. Philanthropy is personal and often emotional. Someone may come into wealth through loss. There may be conflict in the family. The donor may be passionate about so many things that they're overwhelmed, or they may have some unrealistic expectations about what is possible. The art lies in asking the right questions in the right order, managing the pace and depth of the process, knowing when to share knowledge and examples. As this quote demonstrates, the role will vary over time as trust builds and the advisor and the donor gain greater insight. That is why one of the descriptions of the role was journeymate, as the advisor is working alongside their client. The advisor also has a whole host of questions they need to answer about how they themselves practice. As shown here, these cover things like, who do you work with? Only those whose values you share, or anyone who needs advice? When do you adapt to suit your client, and when are you not the right advisor? How much do you guide, and when do you let people learn from their mistakes? How much do you encourage and build confidence, and how much do you present some of the challenges and all of the options without putting someone off or causing overwhelm? One of the key questions we explore is, how much do you support the donor and how much do you challenge them? If you read the book, you will see that the advisors differ in their views on this. For example, some are cause neutral, and others make the case that some approaches are more effective than others. Let's move on to consider impact. Philanthropists, especially the younger generations, are often driven by impact, by the difference they want to make. However, exactly what donors mean varies. It can mean that they are goals and results driven, or it can mean the impact they want for themselves and their family. It's important for the advisor to dig into what the donor means, as this will be how they are judging their success. It's another area that highlights the importance of the advisor's skills in listening and understanding their client, and their role in bringing knowledge here about impact measurement and some of the problems associated with it, such as the difficulty of attributing change to your contribution, or how a focus on metrics can have negative consequences. For example, distorting the sector to deliver tangible results rather than working in a way that is experimental or preventative or complex or long-term. Just as it's hard for philanthropists to measure their impact, so it's hard for advisors to demonstrate the difference their advice makes, as there are many steps removed. The donor has to act on their advice, and then the organisation funded has to deliver work that then has an impact on people or the planet. Our interviewees shared the indicators they use for knowing they've done a good job. These range from the practical, such as saving time, to the transformational, when a donor gains in confidence and knowledge and is giving more and developing their practice. We believe that good advice leads to better philanthropy. Kath Dovey of the Beacon Collaborative estimates that you could leverage another £1 billion per year into the non-profit sector with better advice in the UK. We'd like to see research that demonstrates the value of good advice so that more people seek advice and refer to philanthropic advisors.
So more advising sounds like a simple win-win for both donors, the non-profit sector and broader society, but there are some questions about its role and impact that deserve closer scrutiny. So let's consider 3 concerns that we often hear. Firstly, might advisors simply be placating their clients who, after all, are paying their salary? And wouldn't that exacerbate criticisms of philanthropy that it gives wealthy people undue power and unaccountable influence over broader society? Our research finds that that polarity of either serving clients or serving society is not apparent in practice. One of our interviewees describes advisors as serving 2 masters at the same time, donors and charities. And as Emma explained, advising involves educating donors about the extent of needs, how the non-profit sector works, and often challenging them to give more and better. As another interviewee explains, if they didn't want you to challenge and they didn't want you to steer them, to guide them, to do it better, then they probably wouldn't be interested in paying for your services. The second question that often comes up is, does advising add extra barriers and unwelcome complexity for fundraisers? I think it's fair to say that there is some mutual suspicion between advisors and fundraisers, based on the misconception that they're competing to have greater access to and influence over the same donors. But that's a misreading of each of their roles. Fundraisers are trying to cultivate support for the charity they work for, whilst advising is more about cultivating broader donor support for all causes. The role of advisors in expanding the pool of potential donors ought to make them natural allies and partners of fundraisers. As another advisor we interviewed told us on the slide, they really should be allies and partners. The third concern, that fees paid to advisors reduces the net amount available for good causes, can also be considered in the context of what success looks like from the advisor perspective. Not just more donors, but also donors giving more, giving sooner during lifetime rather than in their will, and giving better so that donations are used more efficiently and effectively. As another of our interviewees says, there's no value in philanthropy advisory if it's not creating additional social change, if it's not making money and time and talent be used in a smarter way. So in conclusion, private generosity keeps tens of thousands of charities going and responds to new needs every day. But the challenges facing the world grow ever more complex. And as that happens, we need to extend and improve the philanthropic response. It's becoming more evident we need to do that. So we wrote this book to draw attention to the often overlooked role of philanthropy advising. We wrote this at the outset. I mentioned the Bridgespan Group, who advised Mackenzie Scott. Their co-founder, Tom Tierney, says that generosity alone is rarely sufficient. Outstanding philanthropy requires you to complement heartfelt generosity with a disciplined consideration of what you hope to accomplish. That work of imposing discipline, strategy, and careful consideration on charitable giving, conducted by philanthropy advisors, deserves more attention. We hope that our book will increase awareness and understanding of this role and encourage more people to consider becoming an advisor. We also hope it will encourage those who are already providing professional advice, such as wealth managers, lawyers, and accountants, to add philanthropy to the topics that they routinely raise with their clients. More and better advice will enable more donors to meet the high bars set by Andrew Carnegie and Aristotle, and the best practice exemplified by Angela Burdett-Coutts and Mackenzie Scott, to give money away intelligently and with excellence so that philanthropy is more meaningful for donors and has a greater positive impact on wider society.